They opened doors that were never meant to be opened, and once they did, there was no going back. Mind control, human hybrids, and weapons that could erase cities. These are 100 science experiments that went horribly wrong. Hit subscribe, because some of this was never meant to be found again. Number 1. Unit 731, 1930s-1940s Japan. During World War II, deep in Manchuria, Japan's Unit 731 disguised itself as a disease research facility. Inside, thousands of prisoners, Chinese civilians, POWs, and even children, were used for human experiments. Some were infected with plague, anthrax, or frostbite to study their effects. Others were dissected alive without anesthesia. Women were impregnated and cut open to see how disease spread to unborn babies. The commander, Shiro Ishii, called it science. After the war, the evidence was destroyed, and many of the scientists were granted immunity by the US in exchange for their data. Tens of thousands died, and the victims were buried without names. Unit 731 remains one of the darkest chapters in medical history, where knowledge was valued more than life itself. Number 2. Nazi twin experiments, Auschwitz 1940s. At Auschwitz, Dr. Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, obsessed over twins. He selected them from the arriving prisoners, promising their parents better treatment. But inside his lab, the twins were subjected to unspeakable experiments. Injections of chemicals, blood transfusions between siblings, surgeries without anesthesia. When one twin died, the other was killed for comparison. Mengele sought genetic secrets behind heredity, but his work had no scientific value, only cruelty. After the war, survivors told of needles, fear, and the haunting bond that ended in death. Thousands of twins were experimented on. Only a few hundred survived. The experiments became a symbol of how science, stripped of ethics, becomes horror, wearing a lab coat. Number 3. The Resurrected Pig Brain, Yale 2019. In 2019, Yale scientists made global headlines by reviving pig brains hours after death. Using a system called Brain X, they pumped oxygen-rich fluid through decapitated pig heads retrieved from a slaughterhouse. To their shock, the neurons began firing, blood flowed, and cells responded to stimuli. The brains weren't conscious, but they were alive, in a biological sense. The discovery shattered the definition of death itself. It suggested that the brain's shutdown wasn't an instant event, but a process that could, in theory, be reversed. The experiment wasn't about resurrection, it was about realization. Life and death, it turned out, weren't opposites. They were neighbors, separated by a door that science had just learned how to open. Number 4. The Severed Dog Head Experiment, 1940s USSR. In a Soviet lab during the 1940s, physiologist Sergei Bryukhanenko conducted one of the most haunting experiments ever filmed. He decapitated a dog, attached its head to a primitive heart-lung machine, and pumped oxygenated blood through its arteries. The head blinked, reacted to sounds, even licked its nose when its mouth was touched. For a few minutes it appeared alive. Bryukhanenko claimed it proved that circulation alone could sustain consciousness. The footage shocked the world, part propaganda, part science. Though it later helped develop techniques for open-heart surgery, it raised terrifying ethical questions. Could life be reduced to machinery? The dog's twitching eyes seemed to answer, yes, but only for a moment. Number 5. The Human Centipede Inspiration, 1940s. Long before horror films turned the idea into fiction, Nazi doctors at Ravensbrück concentration camp performed grotesque organ linkage experiments. Prisoners were surgically connected by skin, veins, and digestive tracts in failed attempts to study tissue grafting and infection transfer. Many died in agony. The operations produced no medical insight, only suffering. Decades later, reports of these experiments partly inspired the infamous horror movie The Human Centipede. While the film was fiction, the history behind it wasn't. These atrocities stood as proof that under the Nazi regime, medical research often became a weapon, where the goal wasn't healing the human body but breaking it. Number 6. MK Ultra, 1950s-1960s, CIA. In secret CIA labs across the US and Canada, Scientists began testing LSD, not for therapy but for mind control. It was called MK Ultra. Unknowing subjects, including soldiers, prisoners, and even civilians, were dosed with hallucinogens to see if their thoughts could be manipulated. Some were kept awake for days, others were hypnotized, and some were pushed into psychosis. A few never recovered. Files were destroyed in 1973, but leaks revealed over 80 sub-projects, everything from chemical truth serums to remote influence. The CIA hoped to create a real-life Manchurian candidate. Instead, they shattered countless lives. When it finally surfaced, the government called it a mistake. But to those who lived through it, it was proof that even democracy could lose its moral compass in the name of control. Number 7. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 1932-1972. In Alabama, 600 black men were promised free health care by government doctors, but instead they were being studied, not treated. The researchers wanted to observe how syphilis destroyed the human body over time. Even after penicillin became the known cure, the men were denied it. They were left to go blind, insane, or die, all while believing they were receiving care. Some infected their wives, and children were born with the disease. The study ran for 40 years, hidden behind medical jargon and lies. When it was exposed, public outrage finally forced change in research ethics and patient consent. But for generations of Black Americans, it created deep mistrust toward the medical system, a reminder that science without humanity becomes exploitation. Number 8. The Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971. It started in a fake prison beneath Stanford University. 24 college students were chosen. Half became guards, half became prisoners. It was supposed to last 2 weeks. Within 36 hours, it fell apart. The guards began shouting orders, humiliating the others, forcing them to do push-ups, clean toilets, and even strip naked. The prisoners stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and one by one had mental breakdowns. The guards weren't told to be cruel, they just became it. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo watched as ordinary students turned sadistic, while others lost their sense of identity completely. The experiment was shut down after only 6 days. It proved how easily roles and authority could distort morality, showing that cruelty isn't always born from hate. Sometimes, it's born from permission. Number 9. The Little Albert Experiment, 1920. Inside Johns Hopkins University, a baby named Little Albert was introduced to a soft white rat. He smiled, curious and unafraid. But every time the rat appeared, researchers struck a steel bar behind him, making a loud, terrifying noise. Soon, the baby cried, not just at the rat, but at rabbits, dogs, fur coats, even Santa's white beard. Psychologists John Watson and Rosalie Rayner had successfully conditioned fear, proving emotions could be learned like habits. But they never untrained him. The child left the study still afraid of anything white and fluffy. No one knows what happened to him after. The experiment helped shape modern behavioral psychology, but it crossed every ethical line, traumatizing a child to prove that fear could be taught. It showed how curiosity without compassion can turn science into cruelty. Number 10. The David Reimer Case, 1966. Born in Canada, David Reimer's life changed after a botched circumcision destroyed his genitals at 8 months old. Psychologist John Money convinced his parents to raise him as a girl, claiming gender identity was learned, not innate. David became Brenda, underwent surgeries and was raised in dresses but never felt female. By adolescence, he was depressed, confused, and suicidal. At 14, his parents revealed the truth. David immediately transitioned back, but the trauma lingered. He later spoke publicly about what had been done to him, exposing the dangers of forced identity experiments. In 2004, David Reimer took his own life. His story shattered the notion that biology could be overridden by theory, proving that science without empathy can destroy the very life it tries to shape. Number 11. The Frozen Soldiers, World War II. During World War II, Nazi doctors at Dachau concentration camp carried out brutal hypothermia experiments on prisoners. Victims were submerged in ice water for hours while researchers timed their deaths. searching for ways to save downed German pilots in the North Sea. Some were revived with boiling water, others forced into freezing air. Dozens died in agony. The data was later used to improve survival gear, but the cost was unforgivable. The frozen soldiers became evidence at the Nuremberg trials, showing that even science can be twisted into torture. The images of shivering, dying men in tubs of ice still stand as proof that progress built on suffering is never worth the discovery it brings. Number 12. The lobotomy ice pick era, 1940s. In the 1940s, American psychiatrist Dr. Walter Freeman popularized a procedure that promised to cure mental illness with one quick motion, the transorbital lobotomy. He slid an ice pick-shaped tool behind the patient's eye socket and hammered it into the brain, severing the frontal lobe connections. He performed thousands of these operations, sometimes in front of audiences, sometimes two in one sitting. Patients left subdued, docile, or permanently damaged. Some died. Yet Freeman traveled the country in his lobotomobile, performing surgeries in hospitals and even offices. At first hailed as revolutionary, the procedure was later condemned as barbaric. When antipsychotic drugs emerged in the 1950s, lobotomies vanished, leaving behind a grim reminder of how quickly desperation can masquerade as innovation. Number 13. Head transplant attempts, 1954 and 1970. In the 1950s, Soviet scientist Vladimir Demikhov shocked the world by transplanting a puppy's head onto another dog's body. Both heads could see, move, and even lap water, but only for days before infection set in. 2 decades later, American neurosurgeon Robert White tried the same with monkeys, successfully attaching one head to a new body. The animals awoke, recognized faces, and moved their eyes, but were completely paralyzed below the neck. They survived just 9 days. These experiments raised questions about identity, consciousness, and what makes a being alive. Both scientists claimed they were paving the way for human transplants, but the images they left behind looked more like horror than hope. It was science caught between miracle and monstrosity. Number 14. The Elephant LSD Experiment, 1962. At the Oklahoma City Zoo, researchers wanted to see if elephants could experience psychosis like humans. They injected a bull elephant named Tusco with 297 milligrams of LSD, nearly 3,000 times a human dose. Within minutes, Tusco trumpeted, collapsed, and convulsed violently. His body overheated, and despite frantic attempts to revive him with sedatives, he died within an hour. The scientists later claimed the dosage was miscalculated, but critics argued the entire idea was reckless from the start. Elephants are social, emotional animals, and using one to test extreme drug reactions crossed every ethical line. The only thing the experiment proved was how blind ambition can override empathy, and that not every question deserves to be asked in the name of science. Number 15. The reanimation of a severed human head, 1900s. In early 20th century France, doctors obsessed with the mystery of death turned the guillotine into a laboratory. After executions, physicians quickly retrieved the severed heads of prisoners, connecting them to oxygen pumps and electrodes to test whether any awareness remained. Witnesses claimed the eyes flickered, lips trembled, and expressions changed when names were called. Some even reported the heads tried to speak. Doctors believed the brain might stay alive for several seconds, maybe even longer, after decapitation. The tests, equal parts science and spectacle, fueled debates about consciousness and the soul. Though no proof of lasting awareness ever surfaced, the image of a blinking, gasping head remains one of history's most disturbing attempts to measure the boundary between life and death. Number 16. The Acoustic Kitty Project, 1960s. During the Cold War, the CIA had an idea straight out of a spy novel: turn cats into living microphones. They surgically implanted a tiny microphone in a cat's ear, a transmitter in its skull, and an antenna along its spine. The plan was to release the cat near Soviet embassies so it could secretly record conversations. But on its first mission, the acoustic kitty was released onto a street in Washington, D.C. and was immediately hit by a taxi. The project cost millions and ended in failure. Still, it revealed the extremes of Cold War paranoia, how far intelligence agencies were willing to go to eavesdrop on the enemy. It wasn't just absurd. It was a perfect example of how technology, without wisdom, can turn genius into tragedy. Number 17. China's CRISPR twins, 2018. In 2018, Chinese scientist He Jiankui shocked the world by announcing the birth of twin girls whose DNA he had edited using CRISPR technology. His goal was to make them resistant to HIV by disabling a single gene, but the experiment violated global ethics standards. The edits were done on embryos, meaning the changes were inheritable and irreversible. Scientists condemned the move as reckless, with unknown long-term effects. He Jiankui was later imprisoned, but the twins' existence proved something terrifying. The era of designer humans had begun. It wasn't just theoretical anymore. The genetic code of humanity had officially been rewritten by human hands. Number 18. China's human-animal embryo creation, 2019. In 2019, Chinese and Spanish scientists grew monkey embryos containing human cells, a controversial step toward creating hybrid organisms for organ transplants. The embryos were never brought to term, but they survived long enough to demonstrate that human stem cells could integrate into animal tissue. The idea was to grow human-compatible organs inside animals, solving donor shortages. But the ethics were staggering. Where does the line between human and animal begin to blur? The project was halted before implantation, yet it proved that chimeras are no longer myth. The experiment forced the world to confront a new reality. Science can now build bodies that nature never intended. Number 19. The Brain Organoid Consciousness Test, 2020. By 2020, neuroscientists had learned how to grow clusters of human brain cells, organoids, from stem cells in the lab. Each one was no larger than a pea, yet they began firing electrical signals in rhythmic waves. The patterns resembled those of a developing human brain during sleep. For the first time, scientists had to ask whether these mini-brains were experiencing something, however faint, like consciousness. The goal was to study neurological disease, but the implications reached further. If awareness is just electrical activity, what happens when we accidentally recreate it in a dish? The experiment blurred science as oldest boundary, studying the mind without realizing we might be awakening one. Number 20. The rat bombs, World War II. During World War II, British intelligence devised a plan that sounded straight out of a spy novel: exploding rats. They stuffed the carcasses of dead rats with small charges of plastic explosive and shipped them toward German factories. The idea was simple. If a worker found a rat near a furnace and tossed it into the fire, it would detonate, damaging equipment and spreading panic. Before deployment, German authorities discovered the plan, but the psychological effect still worked. Fearing sabotage, Germany spent enormous time and resources inspecting machinery for booby-trapped animals. The rat bombs may never have exploded, but they proved that in war, fear itself can be the most efficient weapon of all. Number 21. Operation Midnight Climax, 1950s. Hidden inside San Francisco safe houses, the CIA ran brothels for a secret mind control project. Prostitutes were hired to lure men inside, dose their drinks with LSD, and watch what happened, all behind one-way mirrors. The operation was part of Project MK Ultra, designed to test whether drugs, sex, and manipulation could break human will. Agents filmed the encounters while sipping martinis, taking notes on behavior. None of the men knew they were test subjects. The program ran for nearly a decade before exposure forced its shutdown. No one was ever charged, and most records were destroyed. Operation Midnight Climax blurred the line between espionage and exploitation. Proof that during the Cold War, paranoia justified almost anything in the name of control. Number 22. The Milgram Obedience Test, 1961. In a quiet Yale laboratory, volunteers sat in front of a panel of switches marked from 15 to 450 volts. They were told to shock a learner in another room for every wrong answer. What they didn't know was that no real shocks were given. The screams they heard were fake. Yet, When told by a man in a lab coat to continue, most did, even up to the point they believed they were killing someone. Psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to see how far people would go under authority. The result was terrifying. 65% obeyed until the very end, despite hearing cries, silence, and supposed death. It revealed something dark, that obedience could override conscience. The experiment didn't just measure compliance, it exposed the human capacity to follow orders, even when those orders destroy another person. Number 23. The Monster Study, 1939. In an Iowa orphanage, researchers wanted to prove stuttering could be taught. 22 children were divided into two groups. One received kind, encouraging speech therapy. The other was told their voices were broken, that they stuttered and should feel ashamed for speaking. None of them actually had speech problems before. But after weeks of constant criticism and humiliation, some stopped speaking altogether. They developed anxiety, fear, and real speech impediments that lasted for years. The experiment's leader, Wendell Johnson, never published the results, fearing backlash. It was later exposed as one of psychology's most unethical studies. The children had been used like test subjects, their confidence destroyed for data. It proved words could wound as deeply as any experiment, and that harm doesn't always come from machines, but from voices of authority. Number 24. Aversion therapy, 1950s, 1970s. In hospitals and clinics across the US and UK, doctors believed they could cure homosexuality. The method was called aversion therapy. Men were shown same-sex images while being shocked with electricity or given drugs that induced nausea. The goal was to make their bodies reject their natural feelings through pain and fear. Many patients begged to stop but were told it was for their own good. Some were chemically castrated, others institutionalized when the therapy failed. The practice was praised as medical progress at the time, but decades later survivors spoke of trauma, nightmares, and permanent psychological scars. It didn't change orientation, it only broke people. What was called science was really torture dressed in a white coat, revealing how moral panic can twist medicine into cruelty. Number 25. The Third Wave, 1967. At a California high school, history teacher Ron Jones wanted to show his students how fascism could take hold. He began a classroom experiment called the Third Wave. He enforced strict discipline, no talking, perfect posture, and a salute. Within days, students became zealous followers. They recruited others, reported rule breakers, and even turned against classmates who questioned authority. What began as a lesson turned into a movement of control and conformity. Jones ended it after 5 days, revealing it was all staged. But by then, the students had learned something chilling. Dictatorship doesn't always start with violence. It starts with belonging, obedience, and the desire to be part of something powerful. Number 26. Operation Sea Spray, 1950. One morning in 1950, residents of San Francisco noticed a strange fog drifting over the bay. What they didn't know was that U.S. Navy ships offshore were secretly spraying the city with bacteria. The experiment, called Operation Sea Spray, tested how easily biological weapons could spread in urban air. Over 6 days, clouds of Serratia marcescens, a supposedly harmless bacteria, blanketed the city. Soon, people began turning up at hospitals with rare infections, and at least one man died. The military denied involvement for decades, until documents surfaced showing San Francisco had been used as a living laboratory. More than 8,000 people may have inhaled the bacteria without consent. It revealed that even after World War II, biowarfare wasn't just theory. It was being practiced on civilians, in secret, on home soil. Number 27. Operation Plum Bob, 1957. In the Nevada desert, hundreds of U.S. soldiers stood in trenches as a nuclear bomb exploded above them. It was part of Operation Plum Bob, a series of tests to study radiation exposure, shock waves, and human reaction. The soldiers were told it was safe. Moments after detonation, they were ordered to march toward the blast zone, through glowing dust and debris. Cameras recorded their movements as data. The goal was to see how troops might function on a nuclear battlefield. Years later, many veterans developed cancers and radiation-related illnesses, yet most were never compensated. The government called it essential research. But for those who were there, it was something else. A moment when science stopped studying war and started testing the people who would fight it. Number 28. Project Sunshine, 1953. After nuclear testing in the 1950s, scientists needed to understand how radioactive fallout spread through human tissue, especially bones. But instead of volunteers, they used the unthinkable. Under a project called Sunshine, researchers secretly collected the remains of deceased infants and children from hospitals around the world, often without parental consent. Samples of bone and tissue were shipped to U.S. labs to measure strontium-90, a radioactive isotope from bomb fallout. Parents never knew. The results helped build global radiation safety standards, but at a moral cost that still echoes today. Project Sunshine proved that even in pursuit of knowledge, humanity's brightest minds were capable of the darkest justifications. Number 29. The Frozen Monkey Head Swap, 1959. In the late 1950s, Soviet scientists performed one of the most shocking experiments in medical history. They surgically transplanted the head of one monkey onto another's body, after both were cooled to near freezing to slow cellular decay. For a brief moment, the hybrid creature blinked, moved its mouth, and even drank water. Then, as circulation faltered, it died within hours. The experiment, led by Vladimir Demikov, was meant to study organ transplantation, not horror. Yet the image of two heads stitched together became one of science's darkest symbols. Though grotesque, it paved the way for later research in transplantation, proof that progress often crawls through territory no one wants to revisit. Number 30. Dr. Robert White's monkey head transplants, 1970. 2 decades later, American neurosurgeon Dr. Robert White took Demikov's work further. He removed a monkey's head and attached it to another's body, connecting blood vessels but not the spinal cord. When the monkey awoke, it could see, hear, and even try to bite researchers, but it was completely paralyzed from the neck down. It survived 8 days before the body rejected the head. White claimed it was a breakthrough for future human brain transplants, though most saw it as monstrous. His work sparked fierce ethical debate, not just about what could be done, but what should be done. The experiment became a grim milestone in neuroscience, proof that consciousness could be sustained but never without consequence. Number 31. The Human Radiation Experiments, 1940s-60s. From the 1940s through the 1960s, the U.S. government secretly conducted radiation experiments on hundreds of unsuspecting people. Hospital patients, pregnant women, and even children were injected with plutonium or fed radioactive materials to study internal exposure. Many believed they were receiving treatment. Some were terminally ill, others were simply poor. The data helped shape nuclear safety standards, but at the cost of real human suffering. Entire communities near test sites were exposed without warning, and doctors often falsified records. When the truth emerged in the 1990s, survivors described betrayal that lasted generations. These weren't anonymous test subjects. They were civilians turned into unwilling participants in the atomic age's darkest research. Number 32. Operation Delirium, 1955 to 1975. During the Cold War, the U.S. Army tested powerful chemical agents on its own soldiers under a project called Operation Delirium. The goal was to find non-lethal weapons that could incapacitate enemies by scrambling their minds. Soldiers were exposed to nerve gases, hallucinogens, and experimental drugs like BZ, a compound that caused violent hallucinations and paranoia lasting for days. Many had no idea what they were inhaling. Some laughed uncontrollably, others panicked, seeing enemies that weren't there. The data was classified for decades, buried under national security. When declassified, it revealed a disturbing truth. The military had turned its troops into lab rats in pursuit of psychological warfare. Science had gone to war, and sanity was the first casualty. Number 33. Self-experimenting parasite doctors, 1900s. In the early 1900s, before ethics boards existed, scientists often became their own test subjects, even when the experiments could kill them. To study parasitic infections, Doctors swallowed tapeworms, hookworms, and even roundworms, documenting the results as their bodies deteriorated. Some reported fatigue, weight loss, and hallucinations. Others nearly died from anemia or intestinal rupture. Australian physician Harold Maxwell Lefroy ingested parasites to study treatment effects and eventually died from them. While reckless by today's standards, these self-experiments revealed how parasites spread, survive, and manipulate the body. They helped develop modern anti-parasitic medicine, but proved that curiosity, when mixed with courage and desperation, can turn the scientist into both researcher and victim. Number 34. The goat testicle transplants, 1920s. In the roaring 1920s, a Kansas doctor named John Brinkley promised men renewed strength and virility by surgically implanting goat testicles into their bodies. He claimed the operation boosted stamina and restored youth. Thousands lined up, paying hefty sums for the miracle cure. In reality, the procedure did nothing except spread infection and false hope. Brinkley wasn't even a licensed doctor, yet his charisma, radio ads, and fake testimonials made him a millionaire. When his patients began dying, investigations exposed his fraud. Brinkley fled across state lines, opening new clinics until he was finally shut down. The goat gland craze revealed just how easily people will believe pseudoscience when it feeds desire, and how dangerous medical showmanship can be when profit outweighs proof. Number 35. The Gay Bomb, 1994. In one of the strangest proposals in U.S. military history, Air Force researchers suggested developing a non-lethal weapon that could turn enemy soldiers sexually attracted to each other. The so-called gay bomb would release powerful aphrodisiac chemicals over enemy lines, supposedly breaking down morale and discipline. The concept appeared in a 1994 Air Force Wright Lab document and was actually submitted for funding. It was never built, but the idea alone was enough to cause outrage when declassified years later. The plan revealed the extremes of psychological warfare, where humiliation was seen as a weapon. It wasn't science, and it wasn't satire. It was a real reflection of how war can twist imagination into absurdity. Number 36. The Rat Love Study, 1960s. In the 1960s, neuroscientists James Olds and Peter Milner discovered something shocking about pleasure. They implanted electrodes in rats' brains, specifically in the nucleus accumbens, the reward center, and gave them a lever to press for direct stimulation. The rats pressed obsessively, ignoring food, water, and sleep. Some continued until they collapsed and died. It was the first evidence that the brain's pleasure system could override all survival instincts. The experiment redefined how addiction, reward, and motivation were understood. It also raised disturbing questions. If humans had the same button, would we press it too? The rats weren't just chasing pleasure. They were showing how fragile free will becomes when the brain learns to reward itself. Number 37. The Suicidal Mice Study, 1980s. In the 1980s, researchers built an artificial mouse utopia: unlimited food, no predators, perfect safety. At first, the colony thrived, but as the population exploded, the mice began turning on each other. Mothers abandoned their young. Males fought to death for no reason. Others isolated themselves, grooming endlessly until starvation. Eventually, the colony collapsed entirely. The experiment became known as the behavioral sink, a term coined by John Calhoun to describe how overcrowding destroys social order. It wasn't just about mice. It became a metaphor for humanity. When space disappears and connection breaks down, civilization doesn't explode. It erodes, quietly, from the inside. Number 38. The Artificial Womb, Lambs, 2017. In 2017, scientists at the Children's AS Hospital of Philadelphia placed premature lamb fetuses inside transparent plastic bags filled with synthetic amniotic fluid. Tubes delivered oxygen and nutrients, simulating the womb environment. The lambs grew normally. Their lungs developed, hearts strengthened, and wool began to grow. After 4 weeks, they were healthy enough to breathe air on their own. The experiment marked a breakthrough in neonatal medicine, hinting that one day human infants born too early could survive outside the body. But it also raised profound ethical questions. How far should artificial life support go? The sight of a living creature floating in a man-made womb was both miraculous and unsettling, a glimpse into a future where birth itself might be optional. Number 39. The living brain slice. Experiments, 1980s. In the 1980s, neuroscientists began keeping thin slices of brain tissue alive in petri dishes. By feeding the cells oxygen and nutrients, they could observe neurons firing, connecting, and forming memory patterns outside the body. These living brain slices pulsed with electrical activity, isolated islands of thought, studied under microscopes. The work helped scientists map epilepsy, memory formation, and brain injury recovery. But it also raised eerie questions. If neurons can still fire and communicate, where does awareness end? The brain slices weren't conscious, at least not in any measurable way, but they blurred the line between living matter and living mind. What started as simple biology became a haunting exploration of where thought truly begins. Number 40. The deadly self-vaccination, 1898. In 1898, microbiologist Waldemar Haffkine developed a new vaccine against cholera, but the medical establishment refused to approve human trials, so he tested it on himself. He injected a live sample directly into his arm and suffered fever, nausea, and near-fatal symptoms before recovering completely. Days later, he successfully vaccinated others, saving thousands in India during an outbreak. Haffkine's self-experiment wasn't too rare for his time, but it was one of the deadliest. It proved not only his vaccine's effectiveness, but his willingness to gamble his life for proof. His courage transformed public health, though history nearly forgot his name. The man who risked everything for a cure became a reminder that belief in science sometimes begins with a single reckless act of faith. Number 41. NASA human crash tests, 1950s. Before crash dummies existed, NASA and Air Force scientists used themselves. In the 1950s, volunteers were strapped into rocket sleds, slammed into concrete walls, and ejected at violent speeds, all to study how much force the human body could survive. The most famous subject, Colonel John Stapp, endured deceleration from 632 miles per hour to zero in just over a second. The impact shattered ribs, ruptured blood vessels, and nearly blinded him. But his data saved countless lives, shaping seatbelt and cockpit safety worldwide. Stapp's motto became legendary. Remember, the human body is the best measuring instrument there is, but it is also the most fragile. These experiments proved progress sometimes comes at the speed of pain. Number 42. DARPA Cyborg Moth, 2007. In 2007, DARPA launched an experiment that blurred the line between biology and robotics. Scientists implanted microchips into moth pupae before they hatched, allowing the electronics to fuse naturally with the growing body. When the moths emerged, researchers could wirelessly control their flight by sending signals directly to their muscles. The goal was to create tiny living drones capable of surveillance in places machines couldn't reach. The moths responded instantly, turning, climbing, and landing on command. It was part of a broader push toward biohybrid technology, merging living organisms with machines. The cyborg moths were proof that evolution could now be engineered, and that the future of robotics might have wings. Number 43. The Spider-Man Goat, 2010. In 2010, geneticists at Utah State University engineered goats with spider DNA. The goal wasn't mutation, it was material. The modified goats produced spider silk proteins in their milk, which were extracted and spun into fibers stronger than steel, yet lighter than cotton. Scientists called it biosteel. The silk could be used for medical sutures, armor, or even artificial ligaments. The goats looked normal, grazing peacefully, but their DNA carried the blueprint of an arachnid. The experiment blurred the line between species, between what nature made and what humans could design. It wasn't science fiction. It was the birth of bioengineering, where the threads of evolution could literally be milked. Number 44. The Immortal Jellyfish Study, 1990s. In the 1990s, marine biologists studying Turritopsis dohrnii, a small jellyfish from the Mediterranean, discovered something extraordinary. It could reverse its own aging. When stressed, injured, or old, the jellyfish's cells reverted to an earlier life stage, starting its cycle over again. In theory, it could live forever. Scientists called it biological immortality, though in the wild, few survive long enough to prove it. The discovery revealed that aging isn't always a one-way process. It's coded, reversible under certain conditions. Research into the jellyfish's DNA continues today, as scientists search for clues to human regeneration. The so-called immortal jellyfish reminded the world that nature solved eternal youth long before science ever dreamed of it. Number 45. Project A119, 1958. In 1958, as the space race intensified, U.S. Air Force scientists proposed something extreme: detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon. The project, codenamed A119, was designed to demonstrate American superiority to the Soviet Union by creating a visible explosion seen from Earth. Physicist Carl Sagan, then a young researcher, worked on modeling how lunar dust would rise from the blast. The plan was real and dangerously close to approval before being scrapped over fears it would contaminate the moon and spark global outrage. Decades later, declassified files confirmed it wasn't science fiction. Humanity's first plan for the moon wasn't exploration, it was domination. Number 46. Operation Paperclip, 1945. When World War II ended, the U.S. quietly began recruiting hundreds of German scientists, including former Nazis, under a secret plan called Operation Paperclip. They were engineers, chemists, and physicians who had worked on rockets, chemical weapons, and human experiments. Among them was Wernher von Braun, who had developed the V-2 missile used to bomb London. In America, he helped design the Saturn V rocket that carried humans to the moon. The program gave the U.S. a Cold War advantage, but came with moral compromise. Men who had served a regime of terror were now building the technology of the future. Operation Paperclip blurred the line between justice and necessity, showing how quickly wartime ethics can be rewritten when science promises power. Number 47. Project Iceworm, 1960. Beneath the frozen surface of Greenland, the U.S. Army began building a secret nuclear missile base during the Cold War. The project, called Iceworm, aimed to hide hundreds of nuclear weapons beneath the Arctic ice, ready to strike the Soviet Union. Engineers carved tunnels through glaciers, testing whether a city of soldiers and silos could survive in shifting ice. It couldn't. Within months, the tunnels began collapsing, forcing an evacuation. Officially, the base was disguised as a research station studying snow and climate. Decades later, documents revealed the truth. The plan had failed, but the radioactive waste and fuel remained buried under melting ice. Project Iceworm wasn't just a secret mission. It became a ticking environmental time bomb thawing back to life. Number 48. Operation Chase, 1957-1970. Between 1957 and 1970, the U.S. Navy carried out a series of missions under the code name Chase, short for Cut Holes and Sink M. Old ships filled with obsolete munitions, chemical weapons, and radioactive waste were deliberately sunk in the ocean to dispose of them. Some carried nerve gas, others leaking mustard agents and explosives. The locations were kept secret. Years later, fishermen began pulling up corroded canisters and shells, evidence of the toxic legacy left behind. The ocean floor became a silent graveyard of Cold War waste. Operation Chase was eventually stopped, but its remains are still down there, rusting, leaking, and reminding us that what we bury at sea never truly disappears. Number 49. Pigeon-guided missiles, World War II. While others built bombs, psychologist B.F. Skinner tried to make them think. During World War II, he trained pigeons to peck at images of enemy ships displayed on screens. Their pecks would adjust the missile's course, guiding it precisely to the target. The birds learned fast, hitting bullseyes in over 90% of tests. The project worked, but the military laughed it off, calling it too ridiculous to deploy. It was shelved before seeing combat. Yet Skinner's work proved something profound. Animals could learn complex, goal-directed behavior, even steering weapons. The pigeon-guided missile became a strange symbol of human creativity. Absurd, effective, and unsettling all at once. Number 50. The rat laughing experiment, 2000s. In a small lab at Humboldt University, neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp discovered something hidden in plain sight. Rats could laugh. When gently tickled, they emitted high-pitched ultrasonic chirps beyond human hearing. Using special microphones, researchers recorded the sounds and found they resembled laughter, especially during play. The rats even chased the scientists' hands, seeking more tickles. When stressed or frightened, the laughter vanished. The experiment revealed that joy wasn't uniquely human. It was wired into mammalian brains. It changed how scientists understood emotion, empathy, and social bonding in animals. Behind the cages and electrodes, the study showed something unexpectedly beautiful. Even in the smallest creatures, happiness still finds a way to make a sound. Number 51. The Marsh Chapel Experiment, 1962. Inside Boston University's Marsh Chapel, 20 theology students attended a Good Friday service. Half were secretly given psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and the others a placebo. As the choir sang and the sermon echoed through the church, those who received psilocybin described overwhelming spiritual visions. Some felt they had met God. Others wept uncontrollably. Psychologist Walter Pankey wanted to know if mystical experiences could be chemically induced, and he found that they could. The experiment became a cornerstone in psychedelic research, proving that hallucinogens could trigger profound religious feelings when used in sacred settings. But it also blurred the boundary between faith and neurochemistry. Were those students touched by the divine, or just by chemistry in the brain? The question still divides scientists and theologians today. Number 52. The Stanford Tetris Sleep Experiment, 1994. After hours of non-stop Tetris gameplay, researchers noticed something strange. Players reported seeing falling blocks in their dreams, even when they closed their eyes. Psychologists at Stanford University decided to study it formally. Participants played Tetris for days, then went to sleep while being monitored. Nearly all dreamed of colorful shapes tumbling endlessly, as if their brains couldn't stop the game. Even patients with amnesia, who couldn't consciously remember playing, still dreamed of the blocks. The experiment revealed how deeply repetitive patterns can carve into the subconscious. It was the first clear glimpse of how the brain replays recent experiences during sleep, reorganizing memory, learning, and habit. It also explained why after long gaming sessions you might still see pixels falling behind your eyelids. Number 53. Dr. Duncan McDougall's 21 grams, 1907. In a Massachusetts hospital, Dr. Duncan McDougall set out to prove the human soul had weight. He placed 6 dying patients on a specially built scale, recording their mass before and after death. Each time, he claimed, the body became lighter, by about 21 grams. He concluded that was the weight of the soul leaving the body. Later tests with dogs showed no change, which he took as proof that animals had none. But the study was riddled with errors. Tiny weight shifts from air, sweat, and temperature could easily explain the difference. Still, the myth of the 21 grams lived on, inspiring films, books, and endless debate. Whether true or not, the experiment showed humanity, obsession with measuring the unmeasurable, our need to turn even the mystery of death into data. Number 54. The Skinner Box, 1930s. In a small lab at Harvard, psychologist B.F. Skinner built a box that would change psychology forever. Inside, a pigeon or rat learned to press a lever to receive food. Over time, they pressed it faster, even without a reward, conditioned by expectation. Skinner discovered that behavior could be shaped by reinforcement, not just thought. The Skinner box became the foundation of behaviorism, the idea that free will is just a product of patterns and consequences. It led to breakthroughs in education, therapy, and animal training, but also raised ethical concerns about control and manipulation. Skinner's pigeons weren't just pressing levers. They were pressing the limits of what it means to be human in a world driven by reward and response. Number 55. The Facial Transplant Experiment, 2005. In 2005, a French woman who had been mauled by her dog underwent the world's first partial face transplant. Surgeons replaced her nose, lips, and chin with tissue from a deceased donor. It was an unprecedented medical gamble, combining nerve surgery, microsurgery, and immunosuppressive therapy to prevent rejection. When she awoke, she could move her new lips and even smile. The experiment opened a new era in reconstructive surgery, turning what was once impossible into reality. But it also raised deep ethical questions about identity, consent, and the emotional weight of wearing someone else's face. Since then, full face transplants have been performed around the world, each one walking the fragile line between miracle and moral uncertainty. Number 56. The Cat Telephone Experiment, 1929. In 1929, researchers Ernest Weaver and Charles Bray at Princeton University performed one of the strangest experiments in auditory science. They wanted to prove that the ear transmitted sound as electrical impulses, so they used a live cat. The scientists connected electrodes to its auditory nerve, linked the wires to a telephone receiver, and spoke into the cat's ear. On the other end of the line, sound came through, faint but recognizable. The cat had become a living telephone. Once they confirmed it worked, they euthanized the animal and dissected the nerve to confirm their data. The experiment helped map how sound becomes signal, paving the way for modern cochlear implants. But it also symbolized early science's cold pragmatism, where discovery often came at the cost of compassion. Number 57. The Facial Expression Electrocution Test, 1860s. In 19th century France, neurologist Guillaume Duchenne wanted to understand how facial muscles created emotion. His method? Electricity. He attached electrodes to the faces of living subjects, many of them psychiatric patients, and shocked individual muscles to trigger expressions: fear, joy, agony. He photographed each spasm in detail, building one of the first atlases of human emotion. Duchenne believed he was revealing the anatomy of the soul, but his methods were unnerving. The subjects' forced smiles and twisted grimaces looked more like torture than science. Still, his findings became the foundation for modern facial recognition and emotional research. The experiment captured an unsettling truth. Understanding emotion often meant inflicting it. Number 58. The Homunculus Experiment, 1700s. In the early 18th century, before genetics or microscopes could reveal the truth, some scientists believed every sperm carried a miniature human, a tiny, fully formed person curled inside, called a homunculus. They claimed to have seen these microscopic beings under early lenses, waving arms and legs waiting to grow inside the womb. It was called preformationism, and it dominated biology for decades. The theory meant every person who would ever exist was already contained inside someone else, nested infinitely like Russian dolls. Of course, it was all illusion. What they saw was dust, bubbles, and imagination. But it showed how easily curiosity can turn into conviction when tools outpace understanding. The homunculus wasn't just a false discovery, it was humanity's first glimpse of how belief can masquerade as science. Number 59. Dead frog muscle electricity tests, the 1780s. In 1780s Italy, scientist Luigi Galvani noticed something strange while dissecting a frog. When a metal scalpel touched the exposed nerve, the frog's leg twitched, even though it was dead. Intrigued, he hung frog legs on iron hooks during a thunderstorm, and lightning made them jerk to life. Galvani believed he'd discovered animal electricity, a vital force that powered living things. His experiments inspired the birth of electrophysiology, and even the concept of reanimating the dead, which later influenced Frankenstein. But what he'd actually found was something deeper. The body itself could conduct electricity. Every heartbeat, every thought, every muscle twitch runs on it. Galvani's frogs didn't just twitch, they bridged the gap between life and current, showing that biology and lightning might speak the same language. Number 60. Human-animal blood transfusions, 1600s. In the 17th century, long before transfusions were understood, French and English doctors began injecting animal blood into humans. They believed sheep's blood would calm the insane, or that gentle creatures could transfer their temperament. The first patients received small amounts, and some survived, but others reacted violently. Fever, pain, delirium, and death followed. One patient, after receiving calf's blood, convulsed and died within minutes. The church condemned the practice and most countries banned it soon after. Yet these bizarre experiments paved the way for modern transfusion science. Centuries later, once blood types were discovered, safe transfusions became possible. But in the 1600s, doctors weren't chasing knowledge. They were chasing miracles, proving that curiosity without understanding can easily become catastrophe. Number 61. The corpse reanimation tests, 1800s. In the early 1800s, Italian scientist Giovanni Aldini, the nephew of Luigi Galvani, performed shocking public demonstrations. Using newly executed criminals, he ran electric currents through their bodies to see if he could bring them back to life. Before horrified spectators, limbs jerked, jaws clenched, and eyes snapped open as if the dead were awakening. One body even appeared to take a deep breath. Aldini believed electricity might be the spark of life itself, the key to reanimation. Though the corpses never truly revived, his work inspired both medical progress and literary terror. It was Aldini's experiments that helped inspire Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a story born from real science that blurred the line between revival and resurrection. Number 62. The Baby X Study, 1975. In 1975, psychologists set up a simple experiment. Adults were asked to interact with a baby dressed in yellow, a gender-neutral color. Half were told the baby was a boy, half a girl. When they thought it was male, adults offered blocks, cars, and firm encouragement. When told it was female, they spoke softly, offered dolls, and used gentler tones. The baby was the same, but the treatment was entirely different. The Baby X study revealed how deeply gender stereotypes shape behavior, even unconsciously. It showed that expectations, not biology, often guide how children are raised. The experiment became a cornerstone in developmental psychology, proving that the world starts shaping who we are long before we even understand what gender means. Number 63. The Mind-Controlled Dolphin Experiment, 1960s. In the 1960s, NASA funded an unusual experiment to see if dolphins could learn to speak human language. Researcher Margaret Howe lived for months in a flooded house with a young male dolphin named Peter, recording every interaction. The project's director, neuroscientist John Lilly, introduced LSD to both human and dolphin sessions, believing it might open pathways of communication. The results were chaotic. The dolphin became aggressive and confused, and the project fell apart amid controversy over its bizarre methods. It was meant to study intelligence, but became a cautionary tale of obsession and blurred boundaries. The experiment revealed less about dolphins and more about the dangers of mixing ambition, isolation, and hallucinogens in the name of science. Number 64. Project Bluebird, 1950. Before MK Ultra, there was Project Bluebird, the CIA's first official attempt to control the human mind. Beginning in 1950, agents used hypnosis, sedatives, and LSD on unsuspecting subjects to erase memories and reprogram behavior. They tested soldiers, prisoners, and even psychiatric patients, searching for ways to create amnesia assassins who could obey orders without question. Subjects were placed under hypnosis and fed contradictory commands, their memories later wiped with drugs. Some broke completely. The project's documents were later destroyed or absorbed into MK Ultra, but its legacy remained clear. It was the moment the US government began treating the human mind as a battlefield. What started as national security became a chilling experiment in erasing identity itself. Number 65. The Soviet Zombie Dog Film, 1940. In 1940, Soviet scientists unveiled a film that stunned the world. It showed a dog's severed head connected to a machine of tubes and pumps. The head blinked, licked its nose, and reacted to sound. The device, a crude heart-lung machine, circulated oxygenated blood through the brain, keeping it alive. Western audiences called it fake, but later evidence confirmed the Soviets were experimenting with resuscitation technology. The goal was to revive the dead, or at least prove it was possible. Though the dogs never truly regained consciousness, the research laid groundwork for modern life support systems. The footage still feels like horror, a lifeless head twitching in a lab, proof that the pursuit of life can sometimes look a lot like death. Number 66. The one-year isolation experiment, 1890s. In the 1890s, a Russian scientist named Ivan Pavlov, before his work with dogs, became fascinated with human endurance under solitude. He arranged for a volunteer researcher to live in near-total isolation for an entire year, cut off from sound, sunlight, and social contact. Meals were slid through a slot. Communication was forbidden. At first, the man wrote daily notes. After months, his handwriting deteriorated. He began hallucinating voices and shapes on the walls. By the end, he barely spoke. The study revealed the devastating effects of sensory deprivation long before modern psychology confirmed it. When the door finally opened, the subject had to relearn how to speak in full sentences. The experiment proved that isolation doesn't quiet the mind. It makes it turn against itself. Number 67. DARPA Robotic Rat Project, 2000s. In the early 2000s, DARPA scientists implanted tiny electrodes into the brains of rats, connecting directly to the parts that control movement and reward. Using wireless signals, researchers could make the rats turn left, right, or climb obstacles, effectively remote controlling their actions. To keep them compliant, each correct move triggered a pulse to the brain's pleasure center, giving them the sensation of reward. The goal was to explore brain-machine interfaces for rescue missions, but the results blurred the line between training and control. The rats weren't robots. They were living creatures hijacked by signals. The project opened doors to modern neuroprosthetics and brain-computer research, but it also raised unsettling questions. If we can steer an animal's will, how long until we learn to steer our own? Number 68. Operation Top Hat, 1953. In 1953, the U.S. Army quietly launched a series of chemical exposure tests, known as Operation Top Hat. Soldiers from the Chemical Corps were ordered to walk through fields sprayed with toxic decontaminants and nerve agents to study cleanup procedures. They weren't told what the chemicals were, only that it was training. Protective gear was minimal, and decontamination afterward was crude. Many later reported burns, respiratory problems, and chronic illness. The Army dismissed the project as routine. In reality, it was a human experiment without consent. When it finally came to light decades later, Operation Top Hat joined a growing list of Cold War programs proving that, in the name of defense, governments were willing to sacrifice their own soldiers for data. Number 69. NASA Twin Study, 2015. In 2015, astronaut Scott Kelly spent nearly a full year aboard the International Space Station, while his identical twin brother, Mark, remained on Earth. NASA scientists used them to study how long-term spaceflight affects the human body at the genetic level. When Scott returned, tests showed his DNA had changed, not permanently but measurably. His telomeres, the protective ends of chromosomes, lengthened in space, then shortened again after his return. His immune system, vision, and even gene expression shifted in response to microgravity and radiation. The study proved that space doesn't just challenge muscles and bones. It rewrites biology itself. The twin study gave NASA a glimpse of what happens when evolution leaves Earth behind, and what might await future humans born among the stars. Number 70. The Doomsday Seed Vault, 2008. In 2008, on a remote island in the Arctic Circle, Norway opened a concrete vault carved deep into a frozen mountain, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Inside are millions of seeds from nearly every known crop on Earth, kept at sub-zero temperatures as a backup for civilization. If war, disease, or climate collapse wipes out agriculture, these seeds could regrow the world's food supply. The vault can survive nuclear war, earthquakes, and rising seas. It's guarded by steel doors and permafrost, nature's own freezer. Sometimes called the Doomsday Vault, it is both a monument to human foresight and a silent warning that we've built something to save the future because we know we might destroy it. Number 71. The Rat Park Experiment, 1970s. In the late 1970s, psychologist Bruce Alexander questioned the idea that drugs alone caused addiction. Previous studies had shown rats compulsively pressing levers for morphine until they died, but those rats were always isolated, trapped in empty cages. So Alexander built Rat Park, a roomy space with toys, tunnels, and other rats to play with. When given the choice between plain water and morphine-laced water, most rats in Rat Park ignored the drug entirely. But lonely, caged rats still overdosed. The conclusion was radical. Addiction wasn't just chemical, it was environmental. It came from isolation, not weakness. The experiment challenged decades of assumptions about dependency, showing that connection, community, and purpose could be more powerful than any drug. Number 72. Project Stargate, 1978 to 1995. During the Cold War, the CIA and U.S. Army secretly funded research into psychic spying. It was called Project Stargate. Participants claimed they could perform remote viewing, seeing hidden locations, documents, or events using only the mind. Some described Soviet bases, others tried to locate hostages or nuclear sites. For nearly 2 decades, millions of dollars were spent chasing psychic intelligence. There were a few eerie coincidences, but no reliable proof. When the project was declassified in the 1990s, it revealed a strange truth. The government had seriously explored the paranormal out of fear that enemies might do the same. It blurred the line between science and superstition, a reminder that even in the age of reason, belief still has power over the people who wield it. Number 73. The Marshmallow Test, 1972. A child sits in front of a marshmallow. The rule is simple. If they wait 15 minutes without eating it, they'll get 2. Most kids grab it within seconds. A few resist, squirming, singing, covering their eyes. Anything to fight temptation. Psychologist Walter Mischel used the test to measure self-control and predict future success. Years later, follow-ups found that those who waited tended to perform better in school and careers. But later research revealed a deeper layer. Environment mattered just as much as willpower. Kids who trusted adults to keep promises were more likely to wait. The test wasn't just about discipline, it was about trust, patience, and the belief that the world will reward you for waiting. Number 74. The Good Samaritan Study, 1973. At Princeton University, seminary students, training to become priests, were told to deliver a short talk nearby. Some were told they were late and needed to hurry. On the way, each passed a man slumped in a doorway, coughing and struggling. Most didn't stop. The ones who thought they were late almost never did. The experiment wasn't testing kindness, it was testing attention. Psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson found that morality could vanish under pressure. Being in a rush, they ignored the very teachings they were about to preach, including the parable of the Good Samaritan itself. It revealed that doing good isn't just about belief or training. It's about having time to notice someone needs help. Number 75. The Facial Feedback Experiment, 1988. Psychologists wanted to see if smiling could actually make you happier. So they asked volunteers to hold a pen in their mouths, either between their teeth, forcing a smile, or between their lips, mimicking a frown. Then they rated cartoons for how funny they were. The smilers consistently found them funnier. It was simple but powerful. Facial expressions didn't just reflect emotion, they could shape it. Later studies debated the effect's strength, but the idea changed how we understand emotion. The experiment showed the brain isn't a passive observer, it listens to the body's signals. Even small gestures, like forcing a grin, can trick the mind into feeling better, at least for a moment. Number 76. The Spider on Drugs Experiment, 1995. In 1995, NASA scientists wanted to study how psychoactive drugs affected motor control, using spiders. They exposed orb weaver spiders to substances like caffeine, LSD, marijuana, and amphetamines, then watched them spin webs. The results were bizarre. The LSD webs were delicate and geometric, almost artistic. Caffeine webs were chaotic, strands tangled, symmetry gone. Amphetamine webs looked frantic, like scribbles in silk. The experiment revealed that even small chemical changes in the brain could drastically alter behavior and coordination. It became a striking metaphor for how drugs distort perception, whether human or arachnid. The images, equal parts funny and disturbing, showed one thing clearly. Chaos looks the same in every nervous system. Number 77. The Stanford Hypnosis Experiments, 1950s. In the 1950s, psychologists at Stanford University explored the limits of the human mind under hypnosis. Subjects were placed in deep trance and told to perform impossible feats, resist pain, recall hidden memories, even create hallucinations. Some showed remarkable results. They could hold burning matches longer, forget their own names, or feel cold in warm rooms. But others reacted unpredictably, slipping into confusion or distress. The experiment sought to separate suggestion from control. Could hypnosis override free will? The answer was no, but it proved how belief and expectation could alter perception of reality. The research later influenced therapy and criminal interrogation, but also raised chilling questions about just how fragile consciousness really is. Number 78. Operation Big Itch, 1954. In 1954, the U.S. Army tested whether fleas could be used as biological weapons. It was called Operation Big Itch. Bombs filled with uninfected fleas were dropped over test sites in Utah to see if they survive and spread after release. The fleas did survive. Too well. During one test, a containment failure led to a swarm escaping inside the aircraft, biting the crew repeatedly. The operation was part of a larger Cold War push to weaponize insects as disease carriers. Though no infected fleas were ever deployed, the project proved that biological warfare wasn't limited to germs and chemicals. Even tiny parasites could be turned into weapons. It was one of many experiments that blurred the line between defense research and madness. Number 79. The Terror in the Skies Test, 1950s. In the 1950s, as jet technology raced ahead, scientists needed to know how much G-force the human body could endure. Volunteer pilots, and sometimes unwilling airmen, were strapped into spinning centrifuges or rocket sleds that hurled them to the edge of consciousness. They were spun until their vision tunneled, blood drained from their heads, and they blacked out completely. Cameras recorded every second. Some suffered retinal damage. Others passed out mid-test. These brutal experiments helped establish modern flight safety and astronaut training standards. But for those inside the spinning capsules, it wasn't science, it was survival. The test proved one thing. To reach the sky, humans first had to understand what it felt like to fall. Number 80. The Heartbeat Synchronization Study, 2017. In 2017, researchers studying emotional connection made a strange discovery. When couples gazed into each other's eyes for several minutes, their heartbeats began to sync, rising and falling together in near-perfect rhythm. The same happened with breathing patterns. It wasn't magic, but empathy made visible. Scientists called it physiological synchrony, the body mirroring another's emotions through subtle signals. The longer the gaze, the stronger the synchronization. It revealed that intimacy isn't just emotional, it's biological. Our hearts don't just race because of love, they literally fall into step with someone else's. The experiment proved what poets have said for centuries. Sometimes two hearts really do beat as one. Number 81. The Time Perception Isolation Study, 1962. In 1962, French speleologist Michel Siffre descended into a dark cave to study how humans perceive time without sunlight. He planned to stay 2 months, with no clock or natural light, just his mind and a few instruments. Days blurred into weeks. Without sunrise or sunset, his internal clock stretched. He began living 48-hour days, sleeping 12 hours and staying awake 36. When he emerged after 60 days, he thought only 35 had passed. The study proved that the body's circadian rhythm isn't tied to exact 24-hour cycles. It drifts without external cues. Siffre later repeated the experiment multiple times, each more disorienting than the last. In the silence, he discovered something deeper. Time isn't just measured. It's felt, and without light. Even that feeling can fade away. Number 82. Operation Paperclip's Brain Control Spin-off, 1950s. After World War II, many Nazi scientists recruited under Operation Paperclip began advising U.S. intelligence on psychological warfare. Their wartime research on brain trauma and behavior modification directly influenced early CIA projects like Bluebird and MK Ultra. These programs tested electroshock, hypnosis, and LSD on unsuspecting civilians and soldiers, searching for ways to erase memories or control actions. Some subjects were left permanently damaged. Others never knew they'd been part of an experiment. Files were later destroyed, but fragments showed how far the government had borrowed from Nazi-era mind science. What began as a recruitment for rocket engineers evolved into something darker, the weaponization of the human mind itself. Number 83. DARPA Insect Cyborg Project, 2010s. In the 2010s, DARPA pushed bioengineering further with its Hybrid Insect Microelectromechanical Systems program, or HIMEMS. Scientists implanted microchips and electrodes into beetles and moths during metamorphosis, letting the electronics grow inside their bodies. Once the insects matured, they could be remotely steered mid-flight through electrical pulses controlling their wings. The goal was to create living surveillance drones capable of slipping unnoticed into any environment. The experiment succeeded. The insects responded instantly to commands, but the ethics lagged behind. These weren't robots or animals anymore. They were something in between. The DARPA cyborg insects became proof that the boundary between biology and machine isn't disappearing. It is evolving. Number 84. NASA's Vomit Comet, 1959 to present. Since 1959, NASA has trained astronauts using a plane with one cruel nickname, the Vomit Comet. It flies steep parabolic arcs, rising sharply and then plunging toward Earth, creating brief bursts of weightlessness. For 20 seconds at a time, passengers float, then crash back down as gravity returns. The process repeats dozens of times, and so does the nausea. Buckets line the cabin, and even veteran flyers rarely escape without getting sick. But through those stomach-turning flights, NASA perfected how humans move, eat, and work in zero gravity. Every space mission owes part of its success to those chaotic few seconds of simulated orbit. The Vomit Comet proved that before we could conquer space, we had to learn how to stomach it. Number 85. The Minnesota Starvation Experiment, 1944. During World War II, 36 volunteers agreed to starve for science. Conducted at the University of Minnesota, the experiment aimed to understand how famine affected both body and mind. For 6 months, the men lived on half their normal calories: thin soups, potatoes, and bread. Their weight dropped dramatically. They became irritable, depressed, obsessed with food. Some chewed endlessly, others collected recipes they'd never cook. Their hearts weakened, their bodies slowed, and even their personalities changed. After the starvation phase, refeeding began, but recovery was agonizingly slow. The study revealed the psychological torment of hunger and later helped develop treatments for war-torn countries. Yet behind its noble goal was the haunting truth that the line between research and suffering is often paper-thin. Number 86. Harlow's Monkey Experiments, 1950s. At the University of Wisconsin, psychologist Harry Harlow studied love by taking it away. He separated infant monkeys from their mothers and placed them with 2 artificial mothers, one made of wire that dispensed milk, and one covered in soft cloth that gave no food. The babies clung desperately to the soft one, choosing comfort over nourishment. When frightened, they ran to the cloth figure, not the one that fed them. Harlow then isolated some for months, and they emerged broken, unable to socialize or even mate. The research proved affection was essential for development, not optional, but it came at a moral cost. The images of terrified, lonely monkeys still stand as a dark reminder that understanding love shouldn't require creating its absence. Number 87. The Rosenhan Experiment, 1973. 8 perfectly sane people walked into psychiatric hospitals across the US, claiming they heard voices saying only 3 words: empty, hollow, and thud. All were admitted, diagnosed with schizophrenia, and locked in wards. Once inside, they acted completely normal, yet staff never noticed. Doctors saw every action through the lens of illness. Notes described pathological writing when they simply took notes. On average, it took 19 days before they were released, labeled in remission. The experiment exposed how easily institutions could mistake sanity for madness. When challenged, one hospital claimed it could spot imposters, but Rosenhan never sent any, and they still identified dozens of supposed fakes. The study shook psychiatry to its core, proving that diagnosis can depend more on perception than reality. Number 88. The Philadelphia Experiment, alleged 1943. It was said to be the day a Navy ship vanished. According to legend, the USS Eldridge was part of a secret experiment to make warships invisible, not to radar but to the naked eye. Witnesses claimed it disappeared in a flash of green light, then reappeared miles away with sailors fused into the metal hull. The Navy denied it ever happened, and no evidence was ever found. The story began with one man's letter in the 1950s and spiraled into decades of conspiracy theories about teleportation and government cover-ups. Scientists later explained the myth likely came from tests on magnetic shielding, not invisibility. But the tale endures, a symbol of how mystery, mixed with fear, can turn rumor into legend. Number 89. Facial shock therapy, 1960s. In the 1960s, psychologists believed they could shock away criminal behavior. At several institutions, electrodes were placed on patients' faces, delivering painful jolts every time they showed aggression, disobedience, or undesirable emotion. The idea was to erase bad impulses through punishment, a kind of electric conditioning. Some subjects screamed, others fainted, and many were left with burns and nerve damage. The therapy was often forced on prisoners and psychiatric patients without consent. When the pain stopped, most showed temporary compliance, but the fear and trauma ran deeper. Critics later called it psychological torture disguised as rehabilitation. The experiments revealed more about the cruelty of control than the science of change, proving electricity could silence behavior but not heal it. Number 90. The Sixth Toe Experiment, 1940s. In the 1940s, developmental biologists experimented with manipulating frog embryos to understand limb formation. By grafting tiny patches of tissue, areas responsible for triggering growth, they successfully created frogs with extra toes. It was called the Sixth Toe Experiment, one of the earliest demonstrations that body plans could be altered by simple genetic signaling. The discovery laid groundwork for evolutionary biology and regenerative medicine, yet it also revealed how fragile the blueprint of life is, that a small push at the right time can rewrite an entire form. What began as curiosity about tadpoles quietly became a preview of the genetic engineering revolution that would follow decades later. Number 91. The Brain in a Jar, 1990s. At Yale University, neuroscientists succeeded in something once thought impossible: keeping parts of a brain alive outside the body. Using a network of oxygenated fluids and temperature control, they sustained sections of pig brains for several hours after death. Neurons fired, synapses transmitted signals, and metabolic activity resumed. The goal wasn't resurrection, but to study consciousness and brain repair. Still, the implications were chilling. Where does life truly end? Later refinements kept entire brains partially functional for up to 36 hours. The experiment opened doors to future medicine, but also to existential dread. A thinking brain, cut off from a body, raises a question science still can't answer. If awareness flickered inside, could it feel the silence? Number 92. NASA Ant Experiment, 2014. In 2014, NASA sent ordinary ants into orbit aboard the International Space Station. The mission to see how they adapted their teamwork in zero gravity. Cameras watched as they searched for food and navigated surfaces without up or down. At first, they drifted clumsily, unable to grip, but within hours they reorganized, forming new patterns of movement and coordination. The ants began spreading out evenly, just like on Earth, but through floating, synchronized effort. The experiment helped scientists understand how complex social behavior adjusts to microgravity, and hinted at future robotic swarm designs for space exploration. Even in the vacuum of space, the ants proved one thing: teamwork doesn't need gravity, only instinct. Number 93. The Elephant Alcohol Study, 1970s. In the 1970s, researchers tried to calculate how much alcohol it would take to get an elephant drunk. Using body weight ratios, they estimated the dose, then attempted to replicate it. But the math was off, way off. To reach human-like intoxication, an elephant would need to drink over 200 liters of wine, nearly impossible before fatal poisoning. Later experiments confirmed elephants metabolize alcohol differently, meaning stories of drunk elephants raiding breweries were mostly myth. The study itself became infamous not for cruelty, but for absurdity. A case of scientific curiosity chasing a headline rather than an answer. It did, however, raise important questions about how different species process substances, and how easy it is for human assumptions to distort biology. Number 94. The Robot Pain Experiment, 2023. In 2023, engineers in Japan created robots with synthetic pain receptors, sensors that mimic the biological response to damage. When struck or burned, the machines reacted with avoidance behaviors, even emitting distress signals. The goal wasn't cruelty, it was empathy. Researchers wanted to see if teaching robots to feel harm could make them better at understanding human suffering. Over time, the AI learned to protect not only itself but the humans around it. The experiment blurred the line between programming and emotion, showing that empathy might not be born. It could be engineered. The question now is whether robots that feel pain will one day ask why we keep giving it to them. Number 95. Operation Teapot, 1955. In 1955, hundreds of American soldiers marched toward mushroom clouds in the Nevada desert. The test was called Operation Teapot, designed to evaluate combat readiness after a nuclear detonation. Troops crouched in trenches as atomic fireballs exploded miles away, then advanced through radioactive dust toward the blast site. They were told it was safe. Cameras rolled as the soldiers' faces glowed in the fallout. The tests were meant to prepare the military for nuclear warfare. But years later, many participants developed radiation sickness, cancers, and genetic damage. Their suffering was quietly buried under classified reports. Operation Teapot proved one thing. In the atomic age, the line between experiment and exposure had already disappeared. Number 96. Project M. Coughton, 1970s. In the shadows of the Cold War, the CIA's obsession with mind control took a bizarre turn. Under the program known as Project M. Coughton, agents began investigating the supernatural, testing astrology, black magic, and witchcraft as tools of psychological warfare. They hired fortune tellers, psychics, and even practicing witches to predict enemy behavior or influence outcomes. Some reports claimed rituals were staged to observe their effects on mood and fear. Others hinted that experimental drugs were mixed with occult practices to test the limits of belief. Nothing tangible ever came from it, but millions were spent chasing shadows. M. Coughton blurred the line between science and superstition. Proof that when fear drives research, even the world's most powerful agencies will reach for the impossible. Number 97. Sleep deprivation studies, 1950s, Russia and US. Long before internet myths like the Russian sleep experiment, real scientists in both the US and Soviet Union were already testing the limits of sleeplessness. Subjects were kept awake for days under bright lights or sensory isolation. Hallucinations began after 72 hours. By 120 hours, they lost touch with reality, seeing shadows, hearing voices, and suffering violent mood swings. Some broke down completely, collapsing into psychosis or paranoia. The goal was to study the effects of exhaustion on the brain, but the results bordered on horror. Sleep wasn't just rest, it was survival. Without it, the mind devoured itself. These experiments proved the brain needs dreams as much as oxygen, and that even science can underestimate the fragility of human sanity.